For thousands of years, elders and knowledge keepers have used stories to educate future generations. Stories and words can help heal our hearts and make Mother Earth a better place for all people. This is Healing Hearts.
Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to Healing Hearts. Well, 2021 has been quite the year. We've had vaccines, we have unearthed the tragic atrocities on residential school lands, Orange T-shirt Day, and finally, National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And through it all on Healing Hearts, we have discussed all of these hard topics and had some really engaging conversations. So tonight, we take a look back with some of the people behind the scenes and find out what shows really, truly resonated with them. But first, a word from our sponsors.
So the Hive is a climbing and fitness facility, so we're bouldering only, which means no ropes or harnesses. We use mats for protection. But the four pillars of our business are climbing, education, health and wellness, and community, and those aspects all kind of come together to create like a 5-star climbing experience.
Well, I can't believe that the year is almost at an end. And you know what? Thank you so much, Clayton and Adrian, for joining us and talking about the year of Healing Hearts. I mean, it has been a passion project. And I think definitely with Clayton as our knowledge keeper, it has expanded. And let's just maybe chat right now quickly on some of the reactions that you've indicated from people not only living right here in Manitoba.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. I can't get over what number show we're on right now, and it's but it's been a really interesting for me. I remember, I think maybe like in the maybe 1980 or 81 or something like that. It was no. It had to be about maybe 85. There was a Métis lady. Her name was Sherry Thibault. She had a program called Wood Smoke and Sweetgrass, and basically it was a live show, and she brought different guests on, and she asked me to come on a couple times, and she was actually a teacher at a school here just in St. James, and she was actually my son's teacher, so I got to know her a little bit off the show, but I think the show lasted about a couple of years, and I often thought that it was so important for us to get our stories out there and our information out there to whoever who may be interested. And then when we started this last month, well, I guess it was this year, or maybe we had the idea last year, but when we started this year, to me it was again my thinking shifted a little bit, and it was important for I guess myself and for yourself and for Hanny to start getting the word out to the next generation and to younger people of all the different topics and stories that we had on, and that's sort of really took me in that direction of it's important, to try to get certain guests on to talk about certain ideas and topics and that, and to basically to try to get as much feedback as possible. And I think maybe what really kind of one thing that really surprised me from having Healing Hearts was my niece had got a hold of me after about maybe 6 shows, and I hadn't talked to her. Her name is Dakota, and she texted me from Edmonton, and we lost touch about maybe 11 years ago, and that's the first time she reached out to me, and she was actually watching Healing Hearts in Edmonton, and then so we reconnected, and I actually went out to Edmonton to visit her this summer, and meet her family and reconnected again. And her mother, who was my younger sister, passed away in 2003, and Dakota was I think 11 years old at the time. And then of course she bounced around different places. She actually came and lived with me for a while, and then she wanted to go back to Calgary where her mom had passed away at, and I guess she felt that she had more connection there, and so she moved back to Edmonton and wound up bouncing around different places, and didn't do too well for a while, she told me, and then basically had a child, and was a single parent for a few years, and then met a really super nice guy from Hobbema, which is a reserve just south of Edmonton, and his name is Josh. And so when she reached out to me and said that she's been watching Healing Hearts, and she said some really touching things to me about how some of the stories have been really touching her, and she learned some new things. She says, and she said, and her older siblings told me this at the time when my sister passed away, that they asked me one time. They said that how come you, as the youngest sibling in your family, are so different from your own family members. And I don't know if they really realized that all of my older siblings went to residential school and I didn't. And they had said that, you're different in a way because you say things that, um, our family rarely ever hears. Here, you talk about, about, you know, loving each other, and, caring for each other, and saying I'm sorry, and basically talking about the truth. And they said, how come our older siblings, your older siblings, have a difficult time doing that? And I just said, I didn't have the answers, but I just said, it could be because they went to residential school. It could be because they were abused. It could be a number of different things. And I didn't go to residential school, but I was part of the 60s school. And I wound up in the foster care in Dauphin, Manitoba, I think when I was 12 years old. And I think maybe the thing about that was that I wound up in a really good foster home, a really caring foster home. And my foster parents, I think they fostered like 350 kids over 45 years. And I was in their home for a little over 5 years. And I think at that time they had had taught me things that I didn't have the ability to learn in my own family, about everything that a normal family goes through, I think. So actually, I talked to my foster mom. I still talk to her maybe twice a week, and she's 88 now. And I lost my foster dad probably about 7 years ago. But I think those are the things my niece had talked about. Basically, you speak from the heart, and obviously you've done a lot of healing. And how did you get there? And some of our family members or relatives haven't gotten there. So she's at a point where her and I are having really good heart-to-heart talks now. And she shared her journey, and her journey isn't long, but her journey was up and down, and very difficult, because I'm sure, for like, I lost my mom when I was 16, and she was 12 when she lost her mom, and I know how difficult it is when you don't when you don't have a parent. And so so her and I are having some good talks now. And it wasn't for Healing Hearts, I'm not too sure if we would have connected. And that's what I think, that, and she said her and her husband and her father-in-law have watched all the shows together. Mm, yeah,
Wow. Well, just to
yeah.
let you know, like we're over 20, like I think 21, and this show will be 22 when it airs. But wow, I mean, to hear that, Clayton, is so rewarding, and I can only imagine what it means to you. And I
Mhm.
know that, thank you so much for all of the behind scenes work, getting guests and making suggestions, because you are the heart and soul of the Indigenous community, knowing the pulse and what is happening. And that is why we started Healing Hearts, so we could
Mhm.
let everybody else know. And hopefully, moving forward, we can educate non Indigenous. And I know that's also a dream of yours, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And like even though I'm retired now, and I think that probably because of my work history, and just the lack of knowledge that most non-native people had, in my career, and it still seems to be the case in a lot of places. I'll give you an example. Like, I went to a function. We had our first in-person function on Sunday night. So my wife and I got invited to the Human Race Museum, and there was 300 people there.
Wow.
And it was quite a large function. and it just seemed like everybody who was there, and they raised $700,000. They said at that event, and so of course I'm talking to different people I haven't met before, and I mentioned to one, and of course, most of the people there were non-native, and I mentioned to one non-native guy. We started talking, and he asked me about the work I did, and and I told him, I said that, yeah, I was a cartographer for 10 years. I said, and he seemed kind of shocked about that. And a cartographer is somebody who makes maps. And then he says to me, he said, wow, he said, that's a pretty good career. He said, did you go to school for that? He said. And I felt like saying no. I won that in a poker game. I felt like telling him, and just to joke around with him. But I didn't say that. But it kind of just struck me, this guy's a businessman, and he asked me if I went to school for my career, and why wouldn't have I? And yeah. So again, so things happen, like, just kind of shocked, kind of took me back as to just how much little people know about our community. Yeah, so that was, but it was a beautiful event, like a very heart touching event. It had to do with, it was called Raising Our Voices, and it had to deal with raising money for the children that were found at the different grave sites. So, I mean, the different residential school sites across Canada, and the murdered missing women. They had Tom Jackson as one of the entertainers, Paul Brandt. Um, who else did they have? Don Amero. So they had some really good entertainment as well there. And it was a long event. I think we got there at 5:30 and we left there at 10:15. But
Wow.
and it was different. That's my first event that I've gone to in maybe nearly 2 years.
Amazing.
And
Well, and Clayton, yes, this 2021 has been a real, I guess, eye opener for everybody with the unearthing
Mhm.
of residential schools again, and also having a National Truth and Reconciliation Day. So maybe, get your comments on that.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of I when they found the graves in Cowess's Reserve in Saskatchewan, I can't remember how much they found, 215 or something like that. Anyways, I just took it upon myself to go there. I told my wife that I'm gonna go to Cowess's Reserve on Saturday. I said, did you want to come? And she said, yeah, for sure. So we just took off Saturday. We got up early Saturday morning, and did a 5-hour drive to Cowess's. And I've been there before many times for powwows, and because I'm a powwow dancer, and I just wanted to go there, and I just felt that I had to go there, pay my respects, and I had to go put tobacco down, and so that's what I did. And it was a really hot, super hot day, and they had a teepee set up, and they had a fire going, and so I met some really good people. I met people from a couple of other provinces that were doing the exact same thing that I was doing. They went there and they had those little flags all over this big field, and basically those were basically where they had found the graves, and for each flag that they had inside the ground, they had a little small little toy, a baby toy for each one. So that was really touching for me also too. So yeah, I think it's important. And then my community of Sioux Valley, we own the residential school site in Brandon, and I went there on end of October for the Truth and Reconciliation Day. And so far, I think we're up to 153 graves so far. And so it's very personal to me because I had two aunties that went missing from there, and then this was probably in the 40s, and one we had never found, and the second one we actually just found her in 2017. They had just buried her in Florida.
Wow.
And so yeah, because I always heard my mom and my grandmother and her sisters always talking about Dora and Clara, and those were the two youngest sisters that went missing from Brandon Residential School. And I heard them cry many times for them, about missing them and stuff like that. And to this date, of course, my grandmother passed away in the 70s, but nobody ever told my grandparents whatever happened to their daughters. Never. Yeah.
Oh,
So it's my one of the things on my bucket list is I'm hoping to, when COVID ever clears up, and that I'm going to try to bring her back, bring her from Florida to Sioux Valley, and bury her with her mom and her sisters. So that's sort of one of my long-term plans.
Wow. And then quickly your comments then on National Truth and Reconciliation Day. A long time coming, Clayton?
Yeah, it's been a lot. Yeah, yeah, and then like I said, that when the people in BC, Kamloops found the graves, like people have always talked about those graves. Like I remember my mom she used to share stories about the residential school when we were children. And I remember, we had a three-room house and there was 10 of us living in there. But I remember when the lights went out all the time, she would share some stories about her time at residential school. And she shared some really, really heart-touching stories. And she talked about people, and of course, when my mom went there, she must have went there around maybe 1930, and talked about girls, young friends and that dying there. And so we kind of knew that already, and yeah, so yeah, it's a long time in coming, but I think the truth is there now, where people can't say, these things didn't happen, because there's actually graves now. And I think part of the truth and reconciliation that went on for the 7 years, also made a big difference in regards to attitudes in Canada towards non-Indigenous people, towards our effort to get to the truth. So I'm hoping that we're at the truth now, and people, will accept the truth and help us to move forward.
Oh, yes. So I guess then it's that time, Clayton. I know there's lots to choose from, but you do have a couple of favorites. So I guess let's unveil them and your reason why they're your favorites and they resonate with you.
Okay, so I said one of my favorites was the land and treaties, and I think maybe partly because of that show, was that it's so important for us to share that information with non-native people, and I've been doing that since probably the early '80s, sharing information about residential schools and treaties and policies and that. And so basically, for us to have, our Art Mickey on that show, and Dennis Whitebird, who is the former Grand Chief and also too the former Treaty Commissioner of Manitoba, for them to share that information was so important. And it seems like whenever I listen to Art or Dennis, I always learn something new all the time. And so yeah, so that part is so important to get the word out. And when Dennis was the treaty commissioner, he was the one that headed up that we are all treaty people. And I remember they had a poster campaign and they had commercials going. And of course, non-native people were kind of taken aback by thinking that they're treaty people, and didn't realize that, again, that all this whole land is all, was all about treaties, and we are all treaty people. So that's always been important to me, I guess, to get that word out, and when I travel, I traveled most of Canada and the U.S. on my power trail, but usually when I go to Alberta powwows, I see I see I see some farmers there that have, like, maybe, like they have, like, 10,000 acres of land, and miles and miles of fenced off property and all that. Most people don't realize that land was given to their ancestors, was taken away taken away by the government, and given to their ancestors. And meanwhile, they inherited all this land and lived off the resources, and have these mega farm, cattle ranches or whatever, and they don't realize that was on the back of Indigenous people. So that's sort of what I think about time, when sometimes when I'm traveling in Saskatchewan or Alberta, and I find a lot of those small towns are just so racist towards our people all the time, and they have no clue about how they. I remember one time I was doing a workshop in the '80s, and it was actually to the Canadian Grain Commission, and I was telling them that, and of course, whenever farmers go through a difficult time, they go to the government for help. If they have too much rain or if it's too hot, they go to the government for help, and the government helps them. And of course, they call it subsidies, but I was telling them it's the same thing as welfare. You're basically getting free money from the government. So what's the difference between that and what Indigenous people get? And they had a hard time swallowing that. And I think we were together for 2 days, but they were quite taken aback that I would say that. And I just said it over and over again. You got free, you're going through rough times. You got free money from the government, and that's the same thing as getting welfare. And it's not their title that they weren't happy with. So So we couldn't come to agreement that the subsidies that they get is the same thing as welfare. My second topic that I liked was the addictions show we did. And of course, I had a friend of mine in there. His name was Lance, and I met Lance probably I don't know, maybe 2014 or 15. And I'm always happy or excited when I meet people who beat their addiction. And because I've had so many of my family and friends and colleagues that didn't beat their addiction and have passed away because of it. And so yeah, so whenever I meet people who've gone through that or going through that, and were able to to get through it and come out the other end, very positive and all that. And when I met Lance, I actually offered to do I volunteered to do men's sharing circles at the Red Road Lodge on Main Street, and that's where he was working. So him and I just hit it off, and we became good friends. And I had him come out and share a story a couple of times at different events. And the same thing, he lost his mom when he was like maybe 5 years old. She got beat up in a bar in Vancouver. Some guy hit her with pool cue over a pool game and killed her. And so yes, that's how he got his start. And all his trials and tribulations and welfare. And he actually, Lance is about maybe 45 years old, but I think at that time when I met him in 2015, he just actually met his siblings for the first time. And there was probably about maybe 6 or 7 of them that were taken away, and they were scattered all over Canada. So he was just in the process of meeting his siblings for the first time in his life.
Oh.
And of course he has kids of his own now, and he's done really well. And I think I mentioned that story to you at that time, that when I first met Lance, I offered to take him to a sweat lodge and to my dad's community, and him and some other guys, they met me in St. James here, and they jumped in my truck. And I think I just got that truck like maybe 2 days prior to that, a brand new truck. And they're all shocked, and he asked me, how many kilometers you have on this truck? And I looked at the odometer, and I said, I think I got 72 kilometers on it. It's brand new. And he said, well, I'm going to have one of these one days. I'm going to have one of these one of these days, he says. And then he took me. We went for a sweat 2 months ago, and we went in his brand new truck.
Oh.
And he had a big, beautiful, brand new truck. And and nowadays those trucks are like worth $60,000, And so it's nice to see Lance move forward. And the young woman that was on the show also too, that shared her story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's nothing more powerful than people sharing their personal stories.
Oh,
And
yes.
so most people can relate to other people's stories, and most people, they don't know how to share their story. And those stories come from the heart all the time. And and I've been sharing my story now for probably 30 years now. And some people like it and some people don't. But that's just the way it is. So.
Oh, Clayton, there's something so honest and true about you, and personally, I never get tired of your stories. I can hear them over and over, because they'll still resonate, and it'll still be the truth, and it'll still be honesty that comes from the heart. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for being such a big part of Healing Hearts. Thank you, Clayton.
We were of the belief that it was an international agreement, not a domestic agreement between Canada and First Nations people. And there was a misunderstanding as to how that land became described in the treaties. It was an agreement to share the land. And Canada wanted the land for the more settlers, more immigrants to come into the area. And they wanted to create a new economy, which was agriculture.
Wow.
And because of that, so they had to sit with First Nations, and starting in Eastern Canada all the way to the West Coast. And they were in the process of building a country from, I believe you often hear the term, from coast to coast to coast. So that is what they were doing. But at the same time, they wanted to do that at any cost, including misleading the First Nations people in the treaty dialogue. And it's part of the misunderstanding. So today we still have a major a major relationship with the Crown, with Canada, that we have a lot to settle with respect to that misunderstanding in terms of law, in terms of law and land. And Canada, as I said, they wanted to create the country, so they had to come and see the owners of the land, which happened to be the First Nations people. We were the recognized owners because of 1763, the Royal Proclamation. That's what it was, Royal Proclamation. And because of that Royal Proclamation, it recognizes the First Nations people as the owners of the land, because they were here before the European explorers started to get here. We were already occupying the land. We were using the land. And today we still continue to use that land. It doesn't matter where we travel off reserve to go and use our home territory, wherever it is.
Wow.
So that's the whole concept. And for me, my relationship is to the land. It can be summed up very, very, very simply, that I am part of the land. That spirit of the land is within me, and that land is my food source. It is my clothing source. It is my medical source. Everything that I need is in the land, and that's how it was prescribed to us by the Great Spirit, and sometimes which we know as the Creator, and we have that understanding that the land was provided for our sustainability.
Wow.
So that's the relationship.
Oh, well, we'll talk more about it, Dennis. And yes, going back into history and how so many lessons that we need to learn. And I guess that takes me to our next guest here, Art Mickey, former president of the National Association for Japanese Canadians, and still such a vital role player in our Japanese community here in Manitoba. You hear Dennis's story about the history of the land and what it means to the Indigenous people. The same too, I think, with Japanese Canadians. And so Art, you're going to share your lived experience to really what happened to the Japanese Canadians back in the 1940s and probably even earlier. Art, you might be muted. Sorry, maybe just the beauty of virtual.
There we are.
Yes, there we are.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you for the invitation. First of all, I want to just say that the Japanese arrived in Canada very early, 1877. And the majority of Japanese who immigrated came just at the turn of the century, between about 1903 to 1908 was a major influx of Japanese at the time. However, I think coming to British Columbia, they never felt really welcome because there were discriminatory laws that were passed against all Asians, such as the right not to be able to vote. That was one of the big issues in our community, because without the right to vote or without having that right of citizenship, they were deprived of entering into the professions. You couldn't be a teacher or a doctor. There were many things that you could never become. You could never work for the government. So hence, that was sort of the situation. And when the war began with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Canada declared war on Japan on the same day. And so right away, the Canadian government confiscated properties, mostly fishing boats initially. And they were all taken in a dry dock, and people lost their livelihood. In February of 1942, the government decided to remove all Japanese from the West Coast. So that meant that people such as my parents and grandparents had to leave their farms in the Fraser Valley and to move either into internment camps. Many people were sent to internment camps. Some people were sent to sugar beet farms, and that's how my family came to Manitoba, is because they were placed on sugar beet farms. Some people ended up in prisoner of war camps in Northern Ontario, especially leaders in the community who were deemed to have some influence were sent there. And as a result, we were deprived. And one of the things that took place was the confiscation of property. Property was taken, and when we look back at it, it's mainly because the intent of removing property from people was so that when they moved them out, they would never come back to British Columbia. And that was the way the politicians in BC were stressing to the government, get rid of the Japanese, we don't want them here in British Columbia. And so the taking of the thing that would draw people to where they want to live was property. And so that was all confiscated. People really never received much money for it. In fact, our community paid for their own internment. The government used the monies that they gained from all of this to pay for our incarceration. And so it's interesting that the government didn't really spend that much money in removing Japanese. As a result of that, people were scattered across the country. The initial intent of the government was to send all Japanese to Japan. Strangely, they realized that the majority of people were born in Canada. How do you send them to a strange country? And so that the government withdrew that legislation. However, some 4,000 people had already been sent to Japan by that time, out of the 22,000 people who were removed. And so it was that situation. People were scattered across the country. You could not go back to British Columbia until 4 years after the war ended. Many didn't go back because there's nothing to go back to. Our community in 1977 celebrated 100 years in Canada. At that time, people began to talk about their experiences and what happened. And the National Association 84 decided that that was an unjust treatment on the government, using the War Measures Act to deprive Japanese Canadians of their rights. And we started a campaign to get the government to acknowledge that they made a mistake. And certainly we're asking for some form of compensation. Initially, our community was the one that was quite opposed to any action against the government. Interesting enough, I think that happened with many other groups as well. Initially, there's a reluctance to do that, but we felt there was a basic human rights violation that needed to be acknowledged. And so initially the government was they were prepared to apologize. They were prepared to set up some type of foundation in recognition of the losses. But our community felt that individuals who lost their properties and lost their livelihoods should receive individual compensation. So that became the big stumbling block for 4 years with the government. Finally, in 1988, and this is interesting, in the United States, very similar thing happened to Japanese Americans, and President Reagan signed a bill in '88 to give compensation to Japanese Americans. So we now had a precedent that we really pressed the government with, and they came around and called us back to meet again. And in September 22nd, Prime Minister Mulroney apologized on behalf of Canada for the unjust treatment of Japanese Canadians. And so there was a compensation package in which individuals received $21,000. It was a community fund. And one of the things that we felt is that as a minority group, when we were going through this whole process of campaigning, we did not have support. We couldn't go to the government for funding to help do our studies. In fact, they laughed at us when we asked for them to do research on our losses. And so we had to raise our own money to do that. But we felt that other groups in our country would have similar problems. And so we recommended and established the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, in which our community contributed half of the funds for a $24 million endowment, and the government put in $12 million as well. And so that was a legacy on behalf of all those Japanese Canadians who did not receive compensation because they had already passed away. So it was in our honor that we recognize that. So that's the situation with the redress parts, Tracy.
Wow. I mean, I have to say too, Clayton, yeah, you can jump in here too, but that surprised me, Art. Something that I did not know is that they just wanted to ship all us Japanese back to Japan, and not knowing that it'd be like me, like, I don't speak any Japanese. I'm born here.
But you know, when people look Japanese, and even today, I mean, I still get asked, when did I come to this country? When I've been here for 4 generations, or 3 generations, they still ask that question. So it's the visibility part. And so at that time, I'm sure anyone who looked Japanese had to be a foreigner.
I guess tonight I'd like to go to Lance first to share your story, Lance, but also to give hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Absolutely. For myself, I mean, I was an addict for over 30 years. It's funny that this meeting falls today. I mean, today's my 7th year of sobriety.
Wow.
So there's changes possible, right? So I've smoked everything. I've drank it all. I mean, and I've come a long way. I mean, my children are again in my life, and I've moved forward. I've opened a business. I've done all types of good things with moving forward, right? For me, the biggest thing was connecting with the culture and realizing my identity. That was the biggest thing I had trouble with, right? I was adopted, raised by a white family, so I lost all my culture. And once I reconnected, a lot of it came not easy, but easier than it had in the past. I mean, there were so many attempts at sobriety. I didn't get it until I dealt with the culture aspect and the identity aspect of it all.
Oh, and that's so true, Lance. It has to come from inside. And like you said, so many times you tried and failed. When did you know that, okay, this time it's for real? Besides, I guess, coming to grips and learning about the knowledge of your past.
I can't say that I knew that this time was for real, because you just don't know if it's for real, right? But the thing is, you keep trying, which is what I did. I just kept trying and trying again, right? I had good people around me, good supports. I taken every program under the sun. I mean, I had all the knowledge, I just never applied it, right? And I see a lot of people around me that are still active addicts, active alcoholics, and the one thing for sure is that we can't tell them anything. They're not going to change till they are ready. So for me, that was it. When I was ready, I changed, and that's all there is to it.
And how, you said you have your children back in your life now. How is that relationship going?
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, they're so proud of me for all the changes I've made. I mean, I've accomplished so much in 7 years. And they watch me, right? And they've seen all the bad. They've seen, all the good that's come from quitting. And, they don't have the addiction issues or the drinking issues that I had at their age. So, I mean, they've seen it firsthand, and that's just not for them. So I'm fortunate in that aspect.
And telling yourself that you deserve better, right? I was stuck in a situation where I constantly told myself, this is where I am and this is where I'm going to stay because I don't deserve any better. So I was always down on myself for that. And it was just stuck there. I just thought I had to be in that rut, and that's where I was going to remain. Once I started looking into the cultural aspect, reconnecting with family, stuff like that, being part of the 60s scoop, getting in touch with siblings I've never met, things started really falling into place for me and made things a lot easier. Knowing where I came from, that I do have family and supports out there, and utilizing all that and moving forward. So that was the biggest part for me.
And I want to ask, Lance, was there a person or someone close to you that you talked to first and told them about, your issues, your addiction?
Not so much one person. I mean, everybody kind of around me saw everything I was doing. It was more or less that I saw the people that had faith that I could do better, that kept giving me chance after chance after chance. And it made me realize that, you know what, people think I can do better. Why don't I think I can do better? And once I changed my thinking and started making better choices, it led me to where I am today.
Yeah, no. Well, that's great. Amanda, for you, breaking the...
Once again, I have to agree with Lance. Like once you get in that cycle of using, eventually you get so down and out on yourself and you're like, I don't deserve any better. And so I found with myself, the worse I got into that hole, the heavier I got into the drugs. And it just was a vicious cycle. And then after losing my kids, it probably took me a good month of really using even worse because I felt like I had no purpose. Like, why am I going to try to clean up? Just because that's an addict's mind. Because you use the drugs to numb the pain. But in the long run, I finally realized, like, what am I doing? I have 2 kids out there that I need to be there for, and that's when I fought to get in to BHF to break that cycle. And then once I got out of BHF, that's when I relapsed and I used again. And I found that relapse, it was a couple days. It just opened my eyes and I'm like, do I want to be back in that hole? So for me, the relapse was a good thing. I don't know how, like maybe for other people it wasn't, but it made me realize where I don't want to be. So that was my awakening moment when I'm like, okay, things need to change. I can't go through it because it's an emotional roller coaster, like recovery and getting through it.
Welcome back to the Best of Healing Hearts 2021. While we just had Knowledge Keeper Clayton Sandy pour it all out, he is always a person for a good story and always a good heart. So thank you, Clayton, once again. And now it's my next guest, Adrian Breyfogle, who is a newcomer, I guess, sort of, to say, right, Adrian? New to Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, a big partner for Healing Hearts. And let's first just talk about your position as project coordinator for the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit. Did I get it right?
Yes, Tracy, you did.
Yes.
So yes, I started with Immigration Partnership Winnipeg in the beginning of August.
Mm-hmm.
I am the project coordinator on the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit, also known as the IOTK project. And what this project is, it's basically going to be a toolkit that will allow settlement agencies to teach newcomers and immigrants about some of the history, culture, and contemporary issues that Indigenous peoples in Canada face today. And the goal behind this is to educate and help combat a lot of racist attitudes that are formed when they come over based on stereotypes that they see. So the project itself started a few years ago when actually Clayton and the previous IPW director, Hanny, got together and met, and they recognized that there was a need for this type of education early on in the settlement agencies with newcomers. So they started to brainstorm, and this is how the project came about. And in terms of Healing Hearts was actually a pivot with COVID, as many organizations had to pivot. As part of the project, we had to do community engagement and outreach. And when you can't be around people in public, what do? So Clayton and Hanny came up with the idea for Healing Hearts to bring people together from the newcomer communities and Indigenous communities to allow them to share common stories so they can get that understanding of each other.
Well, and this toolkit is so important. I mean, even for yourself coming in onto this project, I guess your thoughts and comments, Adrian, on, I guess, the misinformation and how long it has gone on.
Yes, very much. there's so much misinformation out there, or negative stereotypes, or preconceived ideas about issues. And this toolkit is so important to educate people, and not just newcomers. It's useful for everybody. A lot of the project partners who are working on it comment how much they have learned just by being part of this project, and how it has opened their eyes. And that's such an enlightening and heartening thing to hear. There you go.
Yes, no. And, let's talk about the newcomer communities. I mean, over this past 2 years, obviously not getting the influx and the numbers that we have been getting, because certainly our city has grown pre-COVID. And I think, maybe now and going into 2022, doors might open to include more people. I guess, how are we addressing all of this, and where does Immigration Partnership Winnipeg fit in to help the newcomers fit into our city?
So Immigration Partnership Winnipeg in itself is not a settlement agency. We offer services to settlement agencies to help them, or we do things like creating the IOTK project. So we are, in a way, a resource for settlement agencies themselves.
Yes, and we need those resources so much, right, is to get the word out, because if somebody comes new to our city, they don't know where to go, and to have, a resource center that can point people in the right direction is so, so important. We look forward to, when will the toolkit be done, the IOTK kit be done?
So the end of the project is going to probably be June of next year. Most of it will be done by then. It will consist of 7 facilitator guides that were written in the train the trainer format, so everybody can just take those guides and teach their own employees. But they are also simple and straightforward enough that you can just read through them yourself and gain the knowledge that's in there. The goal is to also have those converted to a digital learning system, so people can just go online and do the activities themselves. And then there's also an EAL component with each guide, because obviously you can't teach this information to somebody whose first language is not English. So that is being done in partnership with Mansu, who's been a great valuable tool on that aspect. And there will also be short 2 to 3 minute videos that will accompany each guide, and those will address specific topics or misconceptions related to that guide. And those are being done by Codebreaker Films, which is an Indigenous film company.
Oh, awesome. It just sounds like a wonderful and well-needed package that can be accessed by everyone, and really thank you, Adrian, as part of the project, and IPW for all of their support for Healing Hearts. So I guess, I know you're new, but there's definitely been some episodes that have played since you've joined. So your favorite episode, Adrian, of Healing Hearts, and why?
Anything that really has to do with any of the mental health aspect or well-being would be my favorite. My degree is in psychology and Native studies, so it's things I'm interested in. But my personal favorite would have to be the youth and advocacy episode. Those young adults on there, and even children, there's a 13-year-old, they were amazing to just know what they want to do, where they want to go, what the changes they want to make. It's kind of inspiring. The 13-year-old Maya, just so strong-willed already about wanting to be a role model, wanting to do good and show her siblings what success looks like. And then just also adults commenting, you're so young, you don't worry about these things, you can't make these changes yet. And her response being, I know where I want to go, I know what I want to do, and I know my experience. And it's just, I'm like, I want to be you when I grow up. So.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Adrian. It's been so nice to have you on the show. I know that we'll continue our work in 2022, and look forward to getting that IOTK kit done and into the hands of everyone to educate. Thank you so much. You're our last, but definitely not least, to share your story.
Hi, my name is Maya, and I am a Ojibwe Anishinaabe. I come from the city of Winnipeg, but I live in Ontario today. And My story is that, I guess, coming from a beautiful city and an accepting city like Winnipeg really taught me how to accept myself and see the good in everything. But it also taught me to stick up for myself and be my own best friend when I didn't have anybody else. And having that my grandparents and my great uncles and my great aunts going to residential schools and being survivors, I still get to see them smile and I still get to see them laugh. And it opens my heart. And I guess hearing everybody talk about their degrees and masters and finishing up school. I am finishing up school, but I will be graduating grade 8. I'll be 13 and my job is to be a leader for my little sisters and my little brothers. And as a young woman to show them that they can stick up for their rights too. And just to be there and be a kid too at the same time. Yeah, some of the role models were like my grandmother, my granny, and my grandpa. My late grandpa 4 years ago passed away. And he would always tell me that like, you're gonna make it. You're gonna be the first person, my first granddaughter, and my first Owinawa is like a first daughter. The first person to go to university and complete, or college and complete a degree or a PhD. I really looked up to him a lot, and I look up to my mom for being there, supporting both cultures, Polish and Ojibwe. And I look up to my grandmother too, because she teaches me the old traditions, and I look up to my other grandmother who teaches me her traditions. And I feel like that's important, that you keep the role models that you have now as long as you can have them.
Oh, great. How about you, Durst?
I didn't have any growing up until I met my mentor, Eddie. He was an interesting person to meet. So in mid-2016, I was in a previous foster home before I was moved here, or the previous other one, well, whichever. Well, I was gone to this one summer. We went to this field trip to Toronto. So my old foster parent took me to a place that I did not know where I was going, obviously because I was in Toronto. So we went to this one house, a big place. Well, the house was little, but the area was big. So I met this guy. He was a strange guy because he was old and I don't know why. Then my foster parent says, meet Eddie or Edward or whoever. The first thing he said was Hollywood. The name Hollywood was an important thing to actually hear from him. He was a person that changed my act, my life, my mischievous, bad life, I guess. I wasn't much of a good person. I stole, I lied a lot, I ran away a lot, I just got into fights a lot. But he changed my path.
We want to give a very special thank you to all of the guests on Healing Hearts 2021. We truly enjoyed all of the conversations we had on the show. And of course, to Clayton and Adrian, thanks for spending the time and sharing your thoughts on the episodes that resonated so much with you. And to all of you that have watched Healing Hearts, thank you. It means so much to us. And we look forward to 2022. So from all of us here on Healing Hearts, to all of you, Have a very safe and wonderful holiday and a happy new year. Thank you and good night.